Well, those questions to the Deputy Prime Minister today came from the leader of the NDP, and you can see him now. Jagmeet Singh is with me. Good to see you again, Mr. Singh.
Good to see you, sir.
Look, what is it you want from the Prime Minister specifically when it comes to for-profit long-term care homes in this country?
Well, one, I want the Prime Minister to take a position. Having seen all the evidence that the worst conditions have been found in for-profit long-term care homes, and that the second worst in terms of the conditions for people living in a long-term care home have been found at Rivera, which is effectively owned by the federal government. That we want, one, the Prime Minister to pronounce, to make it clear that for-profit should have no place when it comes to the care of seniors. And secondly, do something about what's going on at Rivera. It is something within the federal government's power. The for-profit model is clearly resulting in seniors getting sick, people that live in the long-term care centers being sick and dying, and being in horrible, deplorable conditions. Something has to be done, and I'm calling on the federal government to do something within its power, which is specifically around Rivera. Start there, make it clear that for-profit has no place in the care of people in long-term care. And then let's move from there and work on national standards and work on, on taking care of seniors across the country.
You talked about the Rivera chain. Explain how it's owned by an arm's length investment corporation that also deals with the Canadian Forces, the Public Service, the RCMP. What is it you think, what kind of control do you think the federal government can exercise over that arm's length organization to say, look, take a for-profit model and turn it into a non-profit model, and this is in hundreds of care homes. So how does that work?
The Deputy Prime Minister said in the response today that everything is on the table. Well, if everything is on the table, using the power of government, knowing that the government appoints the board for the Public Service Pension Fund, they appoint the board. So they have power over this Rivera. They have the power. If all tools are on the table, use them. We know that for-profit has resulted in more people getting sick and more people dying. The Deputy Prime Minister herself said all tools are on the table. We're calling on the government to use all those tools, use everything possible, what they're referring to, use the powers they have, and do something to protect seniors.
Okay, so I mean, it's a little more complicated than that, isn't it? I mean, once you start down this road, if that's where you want them to go, then this is a for-profit operation. So presumably, if you want the federal government to make it a not-for-profit organization, revenues are lost there somewhere. Would the government make those up for those investors?
Absolutely. They should solve this problem. And they moved quickly to buy a private pipeline. They just snapped their fingers and bought one up right away. That's just to buy a pipeline. We're talking about seniors that are dying. We're talking about seniors that are getting sick. I would hope that the federal government can use their powers to move quickly to do something to help these seniors. When we've heard the examples. Rivera right now is the site of some of the worst outbreaks in Winnipeg, in Ottawa. They are at facilities owned by Rivera. And I've spoken with the families. And when you speak to people, that are going through such horrible conditions, like we spoke with the family of Charles. Charles is an educator who is now at this personal care home, who has to collect the cockroaches in his unit to prove that there's an infestation. He's sitting in his own waste because there is no one there to take care of him. And he taught kids how to have dignity in themselves. And he says, I don't feel dignity in myself right now. I mean, these are the conditions going on at effectively a federal-owned for-profit care home.
Right.
I mean, this is just so wrong.
So to be clear, I mean, it's the center of an outbreak, as you pointed out, in the city of Winnipeg, 19 deaths and lots more infections at this home. But I guess I'm wondering, as we probe this a little deeper here, is nonprofit the only solution? What if you had higher standards for the for-profit facilities that still allowed some profit, but raised the level of care? Could that work?
Well, I believe that we do need to have better standards when it comes to care, and that's why we've called for a national standard around what would be the best quality care, asking provinces and territories to come up with the best standard and then establish that national standard. I think that's absolutely important. Enforcement is important. But I've made a really clear stance on this. I've looked at the evidence. Experts have looked at the evidence. Profit in long-term care clearly and conclusively results in worse care for seniors, worse care for people. and they're more likely to get sick, they're more likely to die. Because of that, I have made it very clear where I stand on this. Profit has no place when it comes to the care of people in long-term care. It has no place. That's my position.
Make the direct argument for us so that everybody watching understands. So the case you're making for, and there is some evidence. We've seen a Canadian Medical Association journal has done some research that shows that the case rate is higher in for-profit homes, and the death rate has been higher in for-profit homes. But make the connection for us. Okay, now it's a non-profit home. So what does that practically mean for the people there? Does it mean more personal service workers? Does it mean better food? Does it mean higher pay, more nurses on staff? What's the connection there?
It means all of those things, but I can make it really clear. When we were dealing with profit in a long-term care home, there's really two ways to make profit: increase the cost for someone to be there to an astronomical level, or cut the quality. If the cost remains the same, then you have to cut the quality. Both of those things are wrong. A senior should not, a person that needs long-term care should not be prohibited because of cost. And if a company wants to make profit, what we see, and the results are very clear, they cut the quality. And that means lower levels of staffing, that means less care given to each senior, lower quality food, less testing, and the results are clear. When that happens, seniors get sick and seniors die, or people living in long-term care homes get sick and they die. And so that's why it's absolutely, you've laid out everything. When we have public facilities, there is better care, there is more care, there is more attention paid, there's more of the resources used towards paying for the care that they need rather than trying to pay back shareholders. And so we've looked at many examples where during the worst of the outbreak, shareholders were being enriched more than the companies were spending on actually caring for people during COVID-19. And that's the problem, that when you have a profit model, it means the attention is on making profit for the shareholders, not on caring for the people living in the long-term care homes.
Okay, we do know there would be some work to do on this, because some of the provinces are resistant to the federal government interfering in long-term care issues as provincial jurisdiction and setting standards nationally. Some of them have pushed back against that. So, okay, while I've got you here, let me ask you about one other topic before I let you go. The House of Commons today debated a motion from the Bloc Québécois to call on the federal government to apologize for the imposition of the War Measures Act during the FLQ October crisis of 50 years ago. You've said the NDP will support that. Liberals and Conservatives won't. Why is the NDP on side with this?
Well, at the time when the War Measures Act was put in place during the October crisis, the only federal leader that took a stand to say it was the wrong thing to do was Tommy Douglas. New Democrats took a stand on this. When it first happened, it was an unpopular thing to do. There was horrible violence going on perpetrated by the FLQ. A lot of people were in fear, but the War Measures Act resulted in a very heavy-handed approach. Innocent people were arrested, lots of human rights violations. So apologizing for the human rights violations is something that we support. It's important to acknowledge the harms done to people, the injustice that happened. At the same time, we continue to condemn the violence and the harm suffered by people by the attacks.
Right, and so some people oppose the motion, say, look, the motion is ignoring that side of the story. The death of Pierre Laporte, the deputy premier in Quebec, the Labour minister at the time, the kidnapping of James Cross, a British diplomat, all those hundreds of bombings that took place in Quebec. The motion makes no mention of that, but you still believe it's worth supporting simply for what it says about the imposition of the act.
Well, the human rights violations are pretty obvious. It's very clear that a lot of innocent people were unduly and unjustly arrested and mistreated. And so apologizing for that makes sense. If there's any time that a government follows through on a measure or engages in an activity that violates people's human rights, acknowledging that and apologizing for that is the right thing to do.
All right.
It does not take away from the condemnation of the violence that happened in the October crisis. It doesn't take away from vehemently opposing the harm that was suffered by people through the violent acts. That's something that can still remain. You can do both.
All right. Jagmeet Singh, thanks for your time tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you.